Hey Fort Bragg Nabs, Fort Bragg alums. I want to talk to you about Romans 15:4 tonight. For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. So many situations in life are things that we need to reflect on. The scriptures are things we need to reflect on. We actually go through circumstances and we forget what God has taught us. So tonight what we've asked Matthew Clark to do is share his lessons learned on his last deployment. Hope you're encouraged and challenged.
John asked me to share kind of my lessons learned from this deployment, and in order to talk about this deployment, I'm actually going to start with my last one about 4 years ago. So January 5th, 2016, probably not a day significant to any of you guys, but I was battle captain in Afghanistan, and we got a call early in the morning for a 9-line. They dropped a medevac. I launched all of our crew out to go respond. About 11 minutes later, heard the Apaches over the battle net say that the aircraft had landed inside the compound, but that its rotor blades had stopped spinning. And if you know anything about helicopters, when they stop spinning, that's a bad thing. So he was asking if the aircraft was okay, if the crew was okay. And we found out later that the aircraft had landed too close to the side of a building, had smacked the building and knocked off pieces of the blades. And so they shut down the aircraft. And right as soon as that happened, a firefight intensified. And that crew was stranded inside the compound with the SF team for 16 hours before we were able to get them out of there. In the process of trying to get them out of there, 2 other aircraft were shot up, so we lost 3 aircraft. 2 pilots got injured, a crew chief got injured, and an SF guy got killed trying to extract these people out. So what does that have to do with anything? We came back from that deployment, and we knew 2 years later we were going to deploy again. And so just coming from that situation, going to where I'm now one of the senior guys in my company, that I'm responsible for training all these other people, I realized that I think that there was a deficiency in my own thinking going into this deployment, that I really didn't take seriously all the things that we had to do to get ready for the deployment in order to apply that to what we were actually going to do. So it's easy to go through the motions, like, yes, I qualified with my weapon, but can I actually effectively use it? So I became really, really hard on, we have to be purposeful and intentional in our training in order to be ready for the reality of what we're going to use it for. Give you an example, I was flying with a young guy, and he always had a habit of, he would say, hey, I'm going to land right here on the numbers on the runway. And inevitably, he would always land way to the right, way to the left, wherever. He never landed on the numbers. So I'd always challenge him, like, hey, bro, said you're going to land on the numbers. What happened? And his response was always, it's good enough. It's within the standard. I met the standard of the task, and it was good enough. And to which I would always respond, good enough smacks the side of a building and gets someone killed. And so that was kind of my mentality, is we have to take the training seriously. If we say we're going to do, like if they say you're going to land at that spot, you have to land at that spot. Because if you're landing in a compound, you have 1 to 2 feet on either side before you smack the side of a building. So have to be serious. So that was my perspective with all the guys. And then when we went downrange, we had a very young group. And the first time we had a really dark night, where we call it red illumination. There's no moon, no visible light. Can't see the ground until you're about 2 feet from it. We were flying, and then we got back, and a bunch of our guys get out, and even one of our senior guys, our PL, gets out and goes, man, I had no idea how hard of an environment this would be. I wish that I had paid a little bit more attention when we were training back at Fort Knox. Like, see? So I think training is always near and dear to my heart. Being intentional in that training is always important, but I think there's some things that I took away from that idea. So can someone look up 1 Timothy 3:13? I think that the reason that we are here, or I hope the reason that we are here, is every one of us wants to be like Christ, to give ourselves to understanding who Jesus is, and therefore understand who God created us to be, and everything we're doing should be working towards building God's kingdom here on earth. God using us to build that kingdom. So that takes a lot of effort and intentionality on our part. So my perspective with that idea going into this deployment, can someone read that verse? 1 Timothy 3:13.
For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus.
Right, thanks, Brandon. So if you know 1 Timothy 3, Paul's laying out the qualifications of deacons and elders, or deacons and overseers, but if you really dig into what he's really saying, really kind of one of the underlining the bigger context is how well do they serve the body? And so in that verse, he's saying that by them serving well, they gain a good understanding and great confidence in God. So there's a promise to that. Hey, you serve well, you're going to have good standing and solid faith. My perspective going into the deployment was, I want to serve my platoon well, particularly my PL, but I want to serve the platoon well. Unfortunately, I didn't do that. But that was my thought going in, is I want to serve well. So in aviation, you look at, there's three things that can kill you: the enemy, the environment, and other people. And that's where I want to camp out is the enemy, the environment, and other people. So the enemy. The enemy is the only thing that you can flat out avoid. If you know that there's a weapon system over here, just don't fly over it, right? Common sense, if you can. Mission dictates. But that's the only thing that you can avoid. You can't avoid dust. You can't avoid a dark night. You can't avoid wind. And you can't avoid the monkey on the sticks next to you. So the enemy is the only thing that you can avoid. Can someone look up Numbers 25, 6 through 7? So I think that our perspective is that what are we going to put in place to make sure that the enemy does not have a chance to take pot shots at us? So when I was going through, when I was where I was at, we moved into the building where I was going to stay, and inevitably it's the Army. So the building that I moved in, the barracks, there's pictures of girls all over my wall. There's rampant pornography and immorality and everything all around. Obviously not anything I want to be a part of. So, 2 months into the deployment, start missing my wife. It's a little easy to let your thoughts run rampant. So the question is, how am I going to avoid that the enemy having an opportunity? Can someone read that verse, Numbers 25, 6, and 7?
Then an Israelite man brought to his family Midianite women before the eyes of Moses and the whole assembly of Israel while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelites to the tent. Just 6 and 7.
Yes. So the idea here is that Israel had started to marry these other wives, and then they had started to worship these other gods. God set in play, killed a bunch of them, and it seems like that Moses, in a sense, is kind of unaware of what some of the people are doing. And so this guy brings in front of Moses this other wife, almost like he's proud, like, hey, this is my wife. And then this priest comes out and he just spears both of them. And so I think the principle there is once he became aware of the sin, he put it to death. And so in our life, when we think about it, none of us can perfectly avoid sin all of our life. And God actually made requirements for sacrifices for unintentional sins. Hey, when you realize you did something wrong, do the sacrifice. Like, the reality is all of us are going to struggle with sin. But I think the principle is once we become aware of it, what is going to be our attitude towards it? Are we going to put it to death? And so my reaction was, I don't want to give an opportunity for the enemy to take me out. So best thing I could do was not be alone. So I don't want to sit in my talk all day long because I hate sitting around in an office. So I had a hammock. I would just string it up outside of our ops, and I would just sit in my hammock and do Bible study or read a book or other stuff outside of my talk. But the point was I was in a public open area. Can't do a whole lot of stupid stuff when you're in a public open area. So I think that the question is, how are you going to keep the enemy? How are you going to avoid the enemy? Or how are you going to prevent him from being in a position to take pot shots at you? The next killer is the environment. I think our environment, we're thrown together from 2 different battalions. So some guys from this battalion, some guys from that battalion. We were just a platoon. And invariably, there became a us versus them. Our battalion's better, your battalion's better, you suck. Our PL was extremely hard to deal with. You have the just the normal environment of military culture that can sometimes be hard to deal with if you're trying to live your life a certain way. And reality is you cannot avoid the environment. If you're going to go out and land out in the desert, you cannot avoid the dust. You have to get in it. So you have to learn how to operate within that environment. Part of the training aspect. So by nature, I'm a pessimist. By nature, I tend to be very black and white. So this is right, that's wrong, which makes me critical. And so when about a couple months into the deployment, when everybody starts you versus me, all that kind of stuff, I got caught up in the not talking so well of my platoon leader, kind of undercutting him, maybe a little bit of gossiping about the other people. Just in general, my speech was not great towards everybody else. I was letting the environment affect me. Can someone read Colossians 4:6? And someone else grab Romans 12:9 through 10. And so this is where God kind of convicted me was, are you going to let the environment affect you? Are you going to let the environment kill you? Someone read Colossians 4:6 if they're there.
Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person.
Right. Clearly, my conversation was not full of grace and seasoned with salt, particularly towards my platoon leader, who, if you remember when I started, I had committed to serving him and serving the platoon above everybody else. I wasn't doing that. Someone read Romans 12:9 through 10.
Don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other.
Thanks, Seth. So, it says, outdo one another in showing honor. Again, something I was not doing. So, what was my change? I went to my platoon leader, and although this went completely over his head, I went to him and I apologized to him, and I said, hey, I committed before this deployment that my responsibility is to serve you. And I have not been doing that. In fact, I've probably been undercutting you and not talking so well about you, so I'm sorry. And of course, he blew it off and said, hey, you're a great soldier, I'm not worried about you. I'm like, yes, but I'm not representing the person that I'm trying to represent very well. So even though you don't understand it or believe it, I'm sorry. So again, remove myself from the opportunity for the enemy to take potshots at me. But the question with the environment, are you going to let the environment affect you, or are you going to affect the environment? About the same time, an older person that I had deployed with before transferred to our platoon, and so we made a point of, when we were in the talk, our little ops area, we made a point of, hey, what are you getting out of your quiet time? Hey, what's God been teaching you? What do you think about that chapel message that the chaplain came out the other day? So we made a point of talking about God within our ops, which was weird for everyone at first. But when you make it normal, then it's not so weird. So actually we realized other people started asking us about God, and people stopped using such harsh language around us so much, and we affected the environment. Not saying that there was like this great miraculous change and everyone became Christian, but I think the question was for me, am I going to let the environment kill me, or am I going to change the environment? And I think because I had spent time here learning how to do what we do, I was equipped to change the environment if I chose to do so. And then the last one is people. So everyone always says, hey, the first person that's going to kill you is the monkey on the sticks next to you. Never really thought about that before because I always fly with senior people, it seemed like. So I was flying with this individual who easily stressed out, easily overwhelmed, just has very abnormal reactions to stress. I just can't really go into all the stories, it's crazy. But so again, another dark night, red alum, we're doing dust training. Comes down into a dust cloud, we're about 10 feet off the ground. So 10 feet, can't see the ground, can't see in front of us because of all the dust. And then they go, oh, I forgot to make a radio call. Let's off the controls to start tuning a radio to make a radio call. So as we're still coming down, we start tipping over onto our side. I was like, this person's trying to kill me. So obviously I didn't let him, I'm still here, but it's the first time my life flashed before my eyes. But so I think that same goes with other people. We can let people affect us, or we can affect other people. And so there's a statement that someone used to say around here, I don't know who it was, so I can't give them credit, but They said, if you don't know who you are when you go to your unit, the world is going to tell you who you are. And so I think that holds true. We are pursuing Christ because we want to know who Christ is. And by implication, Christ tells us who we are. If I don't know who Christ is, I don't know who I am, the world is going to tell me who I should be. The reality is probably not the right answer. So I can let people affect me, or I can look to Christ. And then I can influence other people. I can affect other people. So as soon as our platoon got formed, I wrote down everyone that was in my platoon, and I committed to praying for them by name every day. And my wife did too. God made it very clear to me right off the bat that he did not want me to start a Bible study. I made everybody know that I was a Christian, but that was the extent of what God told me he wanted me to do. So about 2 months into the deployment, I was frustrated, and I said, God, I've told everyone that I'm a Christian. I've tried to, for the most part, had spiritual conversations with everyone, but I want to do more, but you've told me not to start a Bible study. So what am I supposed to do? So I was working out at that point, went into my ops. After that, it's about an hour later, and two of our guys were talking. And I said, oh, what are you talking about? And the guy says, well, I'm just really frustrated because we're on a really, really small base. Like our base was a half-mile square. It's like we're on a really small base. There's no chaplain, so there's no Bible study. There has not been a chaplain at this base in over 6 years, and there's nothing for me to do spiritually speaking. I was like, what a coincidence. You want to start reading the Bible together? So we committed to reading the Bible together, actually started doing a Bible study with him. But I think that I did something very different with him in that I never told him what to do about anything. I just modeled for him what I was doing. So when I'd see him in the morning, I would say, hey, I was reading my quiet time this morning. What do you think about this thought? But I never told him to do a quiet time. Or when we were going through the Bible study, I would intentionally share verses that I had memorized, but I never told him to memorize a verse. And I'm not saying that that's a principle, because I don't think it is. That's just the way that I felt like God was telling me to communicate with this guy. And man, I am amazed. This guy came to me and said, hey, I think I need to start reading my Bible. I was like, why? Because you do, and you seem to understand it, and I don't understand it. I've been in church my whole life, and you understand the Bible better than I did. One statement that he said was, I've grown up in church my whole life, but no one has explained the Bible to me like you have. So I want to learn how to understand the Bible. I was like, bro, all I do is study it. I'm not special. I haven't been to seminary or anything. I just try to study it, and that's what I'm trying to communicate to you. And I'm amazed at the transformation in that guy's life. Was clearly God working in that dude's life. But just because I wanted to influence him rather than be influenced by everyone else in my platoon. So I think that the question that it comes down to is all of this. The three things that can kill you is the enemy, the environment, and people. The question is, when I'm going through these things, am I loving these people well? So that became a key to me, and it kind of bookends the I want to serve the platoon versus if I want to love well. Almost everyone you talk to, I'm sure you've heard something similar to this phrase. Man, I really don't feel like I fit in with this group. I don't feel like I'm a part of that team. I don't feel like these people know me that well or that these people listen to me. And invariably, all of what that really comes down to is, I don't feel like these people love me that well. Well, I did a Bible study on this while I was gone, and I looked at all the times that Jesus talks about loving. And so you guys can think of whatever verses you know. Two that stick out immediately in my mind is Matthew 22, 37 through 40. Jesus says that the greatest commandment is to love God and love people. John 13, 34 and 35, he says, a new command I give you, you love one another. Both of those, and every verse I could find on love, all of it, the context was, you love other people, not how other people love you. So I think God is concerned with how you treat other people more than how other people treat you. And so that was the question that I had to wrestle with was, it doesn't matter that my PL is an egotist. It doesn't matter that everyone, by nature of what we do, thinks that we're better than everybody else. It doesn't matter that nobody cares about anyone else. What matters is, am I loving them well? And so I started out with, I want to serve them, But really, a better question is, am I loving them well? Because if I'm loving them well, I'm going to be trying to influencing the environment. I'm going to try to influence people and develop other people. And to know God, I'm going to try to avoid the enemy and be prepared. So where this comes back to training is, I think it is easy to, in this environment where if everyone's talking about God, it's easy to talk about God. The reason we take it seriously now is so that when you're isolated, and inevitably you will be isolated, whether you deploy, whether you go to college, whether you go PCS and go back home, inevitably you're going to be in a situation where you're by yourself. And honestly, this is my 4th deployment. My first 3 were epic fails. Maybe not so much the last one, but the previous 2 were epic fails because I did not know how to operate in those environments. So the reason we take it seriously now is so that we know God, we know who we are, we know how to influence other people for those exact situations. Because good enough, you will survive, but not unscathed. So my challenge to everyone is take it seriously because you're going to need it. But the question that it really comes down to is, are we loving people well? So that's kind of my thoughts. 3 things that'll kill you: enemy, environment, and people. How are you trying to figure out how to operate well in those 3 things?